Hello everyone, this is PotatoLegion here. I hope you are keeping very well. In my previous video, we mentioned the PTB patch notes that are coming next week, and I feel like I came at it kind of a one-sided mind and was very biased towards Killer. So what I want to do today is keep a more open mind, go over the patch notes in a bit more detail, and let's discuss what the pros and cons are for both Survivor and Killer, and if this update is actually a good step in the right direction for the game. So what I'm going to do is just break down parts of the patch notes and discuss it a bit further, and then give you guys my pros and cons. If I've missed any, please let me know in the comments below. Keep these conversations civil. We're not here to start an argument or anything like that, but a constructive debate so that we can all get the game going in the correct direction. So I do apologize for me being very biased towards Killer in this update. I just saw the word permanent unbreakable and had a bit of a panic, but let's get straight into this with a more open mind. So let's talk about the Finisher Mori. So let's just read out what I've highlighted in red here. So unlike most PTBs, this feature will not be going live in the following update. It's an opportunity to try it out and share your thoughts in advance. So this isn't going live no matter what happens. They want to just try something new and get our feedback. So if everyone is honestly really against these changes, behavior will not even be implementing it. So make sure that you do join the PTB if you can. Unfortunately, it's only available for PC. So if you can join it, make sure you do, but I'm sure you can still leave feedback if you watch somebody else and just give your opinion through somebody else. So make sure that you voice your opinions as well. Now let's talk about the last standing mechanic. When all survivors are dead, dying, hooked, or have escaped, you become the last standing. But being downed as the final survivor, on the other hand, will trigger the finishing mori. When the last survivor is downed, the trial will draw to a climactic end. So a good point to mention here is it doesn't matter if everybody's slugged per se, but you could have one survivor dead, another on the hook, and then as the killer, you've only got to deal with two survivors on the map. If you do manage to slug one of those survivors, you have 45 seconds to quickly down the other survivor, and you can end the game straight away, which is actually very powerful. And if you think about killers that are very good at snowballing, like the Oni, Myers, Plague, for example, they could take huge advantage of this. If they get somebody killed off early by tunneling, they can hook another survivor, and with perks like barbecue and chili, you can find the last two survivors, use your power, and quickly down the other two, and you've won. That's game over. So there are actually some scenarios here for Killer where you can quickly end the game, and it can be used in a very busted way. The good thing about this, though, which we'll talk about in a minute, is that, you know, the killer hasn't got to struggle too hard at the end when they're just trying to get that last kill, and you get a free mori animation as well. But we'll dive more into the pros and cons in just a second. But that is what the finishing mori is all about. Doesn't matter if everybody's on the field, if you're all slugged, it's game over. So let's talk about hope not lost, though. So the base kit unbreakable with the buff, it's 100% will be 22.5 seconds to pick yourself up, because the default speed now is after being left on the ground for 45 seconds, survivors will now gain the ability to pick themselves up without the need of any perks. The time is affected by recovery speed perks. They've only mentioned unbreakable speed. They haven't mentioned any other perks on how it will affect it. But I think a big con here for Killer, of course, is 22.5 seconds is very fast, and you'll probably find Unbreakable become the new meta if they don't change this speed. This is something that does need to be changed. 45 seconds is a very decent amount of time for a Killer to make a play here, and it stops survivors being overslugged. But again, we'll talk about that in a second. So that is what is going on. You will have the ability to constantly pick yourself up. Let's talk about how the game is currently operating. So the Unbreakable right now takes you 24 seconds to pick yourself up. So it's actually only a 2-second buff to the new Unbreakable, but the difference is you can constantly pick yourself up. There is no limit to that use. It also takes 240 seconds or 4 minutes for a survivor to completely die. So yes, that is a good benefit for having the ability to constantly pick yourself up. I'm not being funny. Nobody in this game wants to be slugged for 4 minutes. Another interesting point here is that Deerstalker is the only perk in the game that allows the killer to see a slugged survivor's aura. So would it be a benefit to actually keep Deerstalker base kit for killer as well, so that killers aren't overslugging? But if you make Deerstalker base kit, it's going to make the Finisher Mori mechanic very powerful, because it's going to be a lot easier as a killer to decide whether or not they overcommit for that 4K slug, because they can see where all the slugs are, and it just gives them too much information to be able to easily capitalize and get that Finisher Mori. So there are some pros and cons to it, but let's get into that just now. Sorry if I'm going on a tangent here. There's a lot to talk about. So let's talk about the pros for Survivor to start with. Survivors aren't slugged for 4 minutes to bleed out anymore, because you can always pick yourself up. Survivors can counter very oppressive slugging, which was uncounterable before without the use of perks. For example, a Starstruck nurse just absolutely bullying a squad very, very quickly. You can easily make a comeback from this now. Survivors can counter killers over slugging to get the 4K at the end. So if a killer is really over sweating for that 4K, you can now pick yourself up and deal with that quite easily. Survivors don't have to rely on teammates to be picked up, which is a great thing for solo queue. So let's just dive into this a little bit more. So of course, nobody wants to be left to bleed out for 4 minutes, and you do not want to have to rely on your teammates, especially on solo queue, to be picked up, because, you know, it's crazy sometimes how you're just left there for absolutely ages, and then the killer gets so much pressure because you're doing nothing productive if you're just sitting there bleeding out, and you can't do anything unless you bring a perk. So it's a nice little feature, keeps you in the game and keeps you productive, and therefore you have more fun. Of course, with killers like Nurse, who are very powerful at slugging, especially with perks like Starstruck, you have a way to make a comeback and make that Nurse work a little bit more. But let's be honest, if Nurse is really sweating, she's probably going to beat you anyway, especially if you're on a solo queue team. So I don't think this is really going to hurt the Nurse in any way, but it at least gives you some sort of a comeback without needing to bring Unbreakable. Let's talk about the pros for Killer. So you can counter Decisive Strike on the last survivor, just makes the games more smoother in terms of the end, because the last thing you want is just to eat a DS Strike at the end and have to get back into chase for the game to basically be your win anyway. You're able to slug within 45 seconds. You can actually end the game straight away and get that easy 4K. So insta-down killers that snowball actually really do actually benefit from this update when you really think about it. So for example, as I said earlier, if there's a survivor already dead on hook, you've only got to deal with 3 people. And if there's 2 people dead, slugging 2 people isn't that crazy hard, especially if you have good information perks. So the Finisher Mori update is actually quite nice for killer when you think about it in terms of getting more 4Ks, and you'll find that the games just end a lot quicker in general, so you can get faster and quicker games, which is a more enjoyable gaming experience. You don't want to be kept in one game for too long with a whole slugfest going on. So let's talk about the cons for Survivor. There is no comeback if your whole team gets slugged. Beforehand, you could potentially wiggle off. So if you're all slugged in one corner of the map, for example, you could probably wiggle off because of how the hook mechanics work. When you hook a survivor on that third hook, the hook disappears permanently. So you can no longer do that. If you are all slugged, it's game over. So if you're playing with absolute bananas, and especially as well, if those banana teammates don't actually recover or pick themselves up and decide to stay slugged to end the game, the killer can just easily slug you all and pick you off immediately, and there's no comeback. So again, it's going to be a lot easier to grief and end games quickly for survivors as well. Decisive Strike will not work if you're the finisher, as I mentioned for the pros for killer as well. Let's talk about the cons for killer, and there's quite a few. So you must be extremely careful when you're slugging, as survivors can reset and you gain nothing, though this is currently a feature in the game. If you overslug, as it states now, you know, teammates can pick each other up. There are still perks like Unbreakable that function and Soul Guard, so you still have to worry about that anyway as a killer, but now it's basically guaranteed that a survivor will always pick themselves up. So you've got to be way more careful with slugging, but to be honest, you really shouldn't be over slugging anyway. Perks like Soul Guard and Power Struggle need to be tweaked, but if they stay as they are, they're going to be very busted on Survivor, because you can just deliberately drop down on a pallet, and if there's a teammate nearby constantly pressuring the pallet, you can't just pick that Survivor up, of course, because you know the Survivor's going to run along and drop the pallet on your head. So it's going to basically make that scenario impossible, so you're going to have to down Survivors before they get on a pallet. And as I said here, Swift groups can purposely go down on pallets and force you to slug and push away. And if they do bring power struggle, they've only got to distract you for a few seconds. And then no matter what happens, that pallet is getting dropped on your head. Therefore, you've just lost it down. But the pro side to that is, if, for example, there is a survivor slugged on a pallet, and then there's a survivor nearby, it might be more beneficial for you to chase that other survivor. But if they are on a Swift, then that survivor could also go down on a pallet, and then the person that you previously slugged can just pick themselves up and force more pressure on you and just keep this process going. So there needs to be something dealt with in terms of that. Overall, I think both sides, when played correctly, can really take advantage of the new system, and it will take some serious getting used to. Survivors, of course, can abuse the permanent unbreakable for some really fun combinations, especially with Swift groups, as I said earlier, with Power Struggle, for example, or Soul Guard. The new unbreakable speed needs to be reduced drastically, or it's going to cause some huge issues. The thing is with Finisher Moris as well, will it actually encourage more killers to tunnel? Because let's think about the almost strat to get a 4K. Tunnel somebody out, quickly get them killed, you've only got to deal with 3 survivors. Technically, once you hook one of them, you've only got to slug 2 more, and it's game over. And slugging 2 survivors isn't crazy hard to do, especially if you've got some good information perks. You could really take advantage of this and constantly force pressure on the last 3. So is tunneling gonna be the new meta here? Killers like Barber, who just managed to get a 3-man slug and then get a 4th, they're going to end the game really fast. So we might even see some new world records in place. There's going to be some crazy things, and I can see the pros and cons on both sides. And it's good that Behavior are trying to deal with this big issue right here when it comes to survivors bleeding out for 4 minutes. Nobody wants to be slugged in a game. It's boring. At least this way, survivors can keep the game going, pick themselves up, and keep high pressure, and the killer will just have to come up with smarter and different ways to get that 4K. When I think about it, I don't overslug all the time myself when I'm playing killer, but there have been scenarios where I've been forced to slug to make a comeback, and that is no longer really possible. But that just means I'm gonna have to play smarter and maybe take advantage of the whole last standing Finisher Mori mechanic in smarter ways. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. Now that you've got a little bit more information about the new Unbreakable, some of my pros and cons, let me know what you guys think. Are you looking forward to this update? Of course, we will play it properly on Tuesday, and I'll give you a full breakdown with some clips of survivors abusing Power Struggle and the whole pallets war situation. Killers being able to quickly end the game. We'll do some stuff like that and really showcase how we can take this whole mechanic to its utmost broken potential. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you want me to do more videos where I just discuss and talk about things and get my opinions on paper like I have here, let me know in the comments below. And I'll hopefully see you all in the next video. Have a good one. Take care. Peace out.
私の名は吉良義景、年齢33歳、自宅は森王町北東部の別荘地帯にあり、結婚はしていない。